Hi, Mark, and today I want to talk about a problematic attempt for a free trade agreement and, quite a new Starmer surprise. In view of the ongoing economic problems in Great Britain, opposition leader Keir Starmer has spoken out in favor of renegotiating the EU exit agreement. Yes, we want closer trade relations with the EU. We can do more with the EU in the area of science and innovation and also in the area of security. That's what Starmer told Sky News Television on Wednesday. His party wants to ensure that Brexit works. Is the Brexit deal that we have working well? No, said Starmer, with a view to the deal negotiated by the Conservative government. He complained that the British economy had been growing too slowly for years, and at the same time he emphasizes that it will take a lot of work to fix this mess. Starmer's Labour is well ahead of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Tories in the polls, and the next general election is expected to be held at the end of 2024. In the months-long tug-of-war over the modalities of EU exit, Labour had advocated that Great Britain continue to form a customs union with the EU and that there should also be full access to the EU internal market. However, the Tories refused, which, among other things, required a complicated special regulation for Northern Ireland. Unlike the rest of the country, the British region remains in the EU single market in order to prevent the creation of a customs border with EU member Ireland. It was only at the beginning of the year that British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak managed to settle the dispute over the interpretation of Northern Ireland regulations, which had become acute after leaving the EU. And he did this with an agreement with the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. 2.5 years after Great Britain finally left the common European market, studies show that the British economy is developing significantly worse than those in the EU countries. While there are labour shortages, the country has failed to curb irregular migration as pro-Brexit advocates have promised. And this week, even Brexit spokesman Nigel Farage had to admit that Brexit was a failure. You might have seen my video yesterday. In this regard, however, he pointed to the British government because it does not curb migration and regulates companies even more than the European Union does. In addition, the pressure from companies in terms of the Brexit deal is increasing. The automaker Stellantis, for example, only threatened on Wednesday that it would have to close its British factories with thousands of employees if the exit agreement was not renegotiated quickly. And as I said, recent polls in Great Britain show clear majorities in favor of the country rejoining the European Union. Labour leader Starmer has categorically ruled this out several times. In the course of years of struggle to leave the EU, the opposition party lost its northern English strongholds to the ruling Tories. Brexit had to be postponed by almost a year because Labour thwarted the resolution of the Brexit deals negotiated by the Tory minority government in the House of Commons at the time. Brexit took place in January 2020, and at the end of 2020 the country finally left the EU internal market when the transitional periods ended. And Great Britain wants to intensify its relations with Switzerland as well after leaving the EU and negotiate a new free trade agreement. A visit by British Trade Minister Kemi Badenoch to Federal Councillor Guy Parmelin in Zurich and in Bern last Monday marked the start for this. Talks will formally begin in London kind of next week. Until Brexit, trade between Switzerland and Great Britain was regulated by bilateral agreements with the EU. But with the exit from the EU, the British had to re-establish their relations with Switzerland. To this end, both sides concluded a provisional trade agreement that has been in force since the beginning of 2021. The initiative for the talks now comes primarily from the British because more than 3 years after Brexit, the country is still struggling with the economic consequences. Great Britain now sees a partner in Switzerland. A close alliance between the two countries, for example, on the financial market, could represent a counterweight to the EU in their minds. During an informal exchange of ideas, Trade Minister Badenoch expressed her conviction that the negotiations should progress quickly. Since Brexit, both countries have quickly put their economic relations on a bilateral footing, as I said, with a large number of new agreements. As part of the Mind the Gap strategy, they initially simply adopted the previous market access rules via the bilateral agreements with the EU. In the second phase, which has now started, they want to go further. The delegations will meet in London on Monday for the first round of negotiations. This is particularly important for Switzerland since the relationship between the UK and the EU has improved significantly in recent months. Switzerland therefore has an interest in further dynamics with the UK so as not to fall behind. For example, before Brexit, the Swiss MEM industry exported significantly more to the UK. The country is a G7 member and the world's fifth largest economy still. It is Switzerland's eighth most important trading partner, including gold trading, then they are even the fourth most important. In view of the already difficult relations with the EU, the negotiations with Great Britain are delicate though, because the Union there could be some resentment in Brussels and ultimately harm Switzerland's relation to the EU. While Great Britain made a conscious decision to leave, Switzerland is dependent on a partnership with the EU in quite many respects. This is still by far the most important trading partner for Switzerland. In addition, some sectors of the economy, such as energy or pharmaceuticals industries, depend on close cooperation with the EU for the supply of medicines and electricity. Exports to the UK, on the other hand, have declined in recent years and play a relatively minor role. Federal Councillor Parmelin also addressed this conflict of objectives during a media briefing on Monday, and he said, "The Federal Council's main goal is to stabilize relations with the EU. The world is moving. It's not the same world as it was 2 or 3 years ago." Parmelin may have alluded to the fact that the Federal Council ended negotiations on a framework agreement with the EU 2 years ago. Talks about a next agreement suffered another setback last week when it became known that the Swiss chief negotiator, Vies, had resigned. "Now we want to discuss with other countries," said the economics minister. "There is now a unique opportunity to negotiate a free trade agreement with Great Britain." When you think of products from Great Britain, the first thing that comes to mind is, English breakfast tea. But there are comparatively few products from Great Britain that can be found in Swiss retail. At Coop, for example, it's mainly cheese, fish, cookies, chips, beer, and spirits, according to a Coop spokesman. Well-known brands include Tyrell's chips, Walker's cookies, and cheddar cheese. Although here in Germany it's Walker's crisps. Great Britain hopes to lower tariffs on imports of red meat, baked goods, and even chocolate into Switzerland. Is chocolate into Switzerland? According to the UK, it supplies agricultural products worth over £5.5 billion to Switzerland every year. Rather, the focus of the talks is on the financial industry, as we all know. London and Zurich are both important European financial centers, and Great Britain also has a lively startup scene still. There are many innovative young financial companies, so-called fintechs. It's attractive for Swiss startups if they can also gain a foothold in Great Britain without too much difficulty. In turn, banks and stock exchanges also benefit from easier market access for companies and lively trading. The London Stock Exchange remains the largest stock exchange in Europe, followed by Paris, Zurich, and Frankfurt, but there will be changes in the future as well. During her stay in Switzerland, the British Trade Secretary visited the Swiss Stock Exchange SIX, or SIX. By far the most important trading product in freight transport has recently been precious metals and precious stones. Here too, the reason for this is the strong financial centers, between which a corresponding number of valuables like gold bars and so on are traded. A large part of the gold sold worldwide is processed in refineries in Switzerland and exported again, especially to China and India. Much of this gold comes from the UK, home to the world's major precious metals exchanges. However, the trade in valuables fluctuates greatly from year to year. From a Swiss perspective, Great Britain is also an important sales market for luxury watches. Whether these areas are also part of the talks remained unclear for the time being, though. Great Britain is also an important sales market for the Swiss machine, electrical, and metal industries. Accordingly, the industry is hoping for improvements there in the talks. The Swiss MEM Association is pushing for the recognition of standards and certifications and for Swiss industrial companies to be able to sell their products more easily to the public sector in Great Britain. Specifically, this involves energy and water supply companies as well as the railway sector. But Switzerland also buys industrial goods from Great Britain. For example, their buses. In 2017 and 2018, the British manufacturer of double-decker buses, Alexander Dennis, delivered 19 double-decker post buses to eastern Switzerland. And a free trade agreement would simplify the supply of spare parts for those buses. But you see, a lot has to happen after Brexit, and in the case of Switzerland, the relationship to the EU makes it difficult to have certain kinds of agreements with other countries if they still want to have the access to their largest trading partner. And so in a globalized world, everything is interconnected, and so everything is quite complicated. And the Brexit didn't make things easier for the UK there as well. But on the other hand, Starmer's plans to renegotiate the whole Brexit deal, well, first of all, the EU will not be very happy about this, because after all those years of negotiations and now the Windsor framework, I'm wondering who they're going to find as the chief negotiator for that. But I have no clue how this can, what this can look like and pass Parliament in Britain. There are, of course, a lot of negotiating options, but what of that will work in the future, I can tell you one thing. Starmer's stance on make Brexit work will not work. Brexit will always be accompanied by negative consequences, whatever you do. You cannot have the benefits of EU membership outside the EU. And so you will always have less benefits than they had when they were a member, especially with all the British exceptionalism that was there during their membership. And that's what I always have to say to people who are saying we want to go back into the EU. Going back would mean going back without any of this exceptionalism, no Thatcher rebate, etc. So people saying we want back into the EU have to think about that part as well. And it would also mean the euro. Despite the fact that a lot of people in the EU don't want to have this UK back in the EU. But I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.